Viajeros, welcome to Mochilazo. My name is Luis.
And I'm Gabby.
And we know you're asking for more content in English, so this is good opportunity to make the Kentucky Bourbon Trail for you in English, because there is a tours in the bourbon distilleries, bourbon whiskey distilleries, that obviously the tour guys will speak in English. So we are in Louisville, Kentucky. We came back to Louisville, Kentucky to take a tour in the distillery that is pretty hard to pronounce for me.
It's Stitzel-Weller. There's also Bone Blade here.
They are the owners of Bullet, Orphan Barrel, that people don't know about it, or the
IW HARPER.
That is most common in Japan. So there is a kind of pretty good bourbon, very aged bourbon, 15 years old. Anyway, this distillery is part of Diageo Group. So who they are the owners or Don Julio Tequila, Buchanan's, Johnny Walker, Crown Royal, Captain Morgan. A lot of brands are under this group. So those guys are part of the group in the bourbon whiskey world. So different than Don Julio Tequila, here they offer tours. And we will take the best one that they can offer it. So we will tour around the distillery. It's pretty big. This complex, they just opened back to the public in 2014. And we will take the tour when they give you some samples or testing when you are walking around. And they offer you the best bourbon whiskey that they made here in-house. So the HARPER one, the HARPER 15 years old, the Orphan Barrel, and we finish with the Blade and Bow. So we're excited. We never tried those bourbons. Apparently it's not cheap, but you will get the best bourbons. That maybe the bottles of that is between $200 to $400. So they're pretty good.
Welcome to Stitzel-Weller. My name is Kelsey and I'm going to be your tour guide. Please take pictures. We love it. Tag us, Blade and Bow Whiskey, Stitzel-Weller Distillery. We just ask that you do not use flash inside any of the buildings. We are going to start at the front door. If you have any questions as we're going through, please let me know. This is an 1.5-hour progressive walking tour. So we're going to walk through some buildings, walk through the property, and we're going to taste as we go. So, if you have any questions, holler at me, throw a hand up, just don't throw anything at me, and we'll be good to go. Welcome. All right, so how many of you noticed the 5 keys? Yeah, right? So those 5 keys stand for the 5 keys of making a fine bourbon. So, Pappy. Anybody ever heard of Pappy? Right? Yeah. So he was our CEO here, and he opened us up 1935 Derby Day. When he would come on property, he would open up the main building, the different brick houses, the staff building, and when he was done, he put his keys up here on the door. This was his sign of Southern hospitality, saying, hey, come on in. We want you to see what we got going on here. We want you to see what we're making, and we want to share it with you. So, the 5 keys to making a fine bourbon: grain, yeast, fermentation, distillation, and aging. Now, the skeleton key is the reason we call it blade and bow. So the blade is the portion that goes into the lock, and the bow is the portion that you hold and turn. So these keys and that blade and bow emblem over there with the 5 key tally mark, that is our homage to Pappy and his 5 keys. So I'll get these back on the door. These are still our official, unofficial, open and close sign every day. So we put them out in the morning and bring them in. Exactly. So they would purchase other people's product, bring it back to their place, mix, mingle, add flavoring, add coloring, and when they're done, they would bottle it as their own product. So at this time, some people were using tobacco spit for flavoring and coloring. Yeah, so if you got it from the Wellers, you knew it did not have that kind of stuff in it. They were known for only distributing the best. So about 10 years later, 1859, Stitzels show up. They're a father and 3 sons, and they make their way from Germany with their still. Yeah, so they set up shop here with that still they brought all the way over. And they don't find wheat like they do over in Germany. What major grain do they find? Corn, right? That's right, lots of corn. So they start making a corn profile whiskey. And it doesn't take too long after they've already distilled and aged for the Wellers to pick up on that Stitzel product. And the Wellers are like, ooh, this is great as it is. We don't need to add anything. We don't need to mingle anything. It is perfect. So the Wellers said, hey, y'all want to mutually exclusively work together? You're new around here, but I'm not. Do you want us to distribute your product? And they were like, heck yeah, right? So they start mutually exclusively working together. We don't officially become Stitzel-Weller until we open up here in 1935 Derby Day. So prior to that, we're 2 different entities just working together. A very, very young old Pappy, Julian Van Winkle Sr. He's about 21 years old, and he gets hired on by the Wellers to be a salesman. So he's pulling a little wagon with a big old barrel of bourbon on it up and down Bardstown Road, and he's selling to the different pubs. Alex Farnsley gets hired on around the same time. Gets hired as a salesman. However, he is not charismatic like Pappy is. He's a numbers guy. Everybody needs a numbers guy, right? So he moves on into the finance department, and both the boys, they start working their way up. So the 1910s hit. A terrible rumor goes around. Prohibition. Yeah. So William LaRue Weller decides, let's get out of the game. Let's sell. And who do they sell to? But their very own Julian Van Winkle and Alex Farnsley. So Julian becomes your modern day CEO, Alex becomes your modern day CFO, and Prohibition hits. Yeah. But we got one of the 6 medicinal licenses. Yeah, so we're gonna move in here so we can get some air conditioning. I'm gonna talk about Prohibition, and then we will move over to the rest of the property. Sound good? All right, come on in. To be selling what was already aging in the barrels on property. Every man, woman, and child could have a pint every 10 days for medicinal purposes. We have lots of very sick families. So sick, so sick. Yeah. So when you tell people not to do something, what do? Do it, right? And usually they do more of it. So drinking increases 60% during Prohibition. Prohibition is 13 years long. Now that we've had a pandemic where we got locked down for about 3 years, can you imagine having no alcohol with that? No, I can't. So it's a long period of time, that 13 years, but 8 years into it, they're running out of medicinal products. So those 6 medicinal licenses, they get a whiskey holiday or a distiller's jubilee. And it is the government saying, hey, use 6 medicinal licenses. You're legally allowed to distill new spirits. And you're only allowed to make as much as you made the year before Prohibition. So it's a mass constraint and a time constraint. But at least we get to have a legally aged product. So we still have about 5 more years of Prohibition after that whiskey holiday. And that makes for some good aging time, right? It makes for some perfect aging time for whiskey. We come out of Prohibition with a legally aged product. Whereas other places, they're trying to hurry up that aging process. They're trying to figure out ways to add, different aging, I guess is a better way of explaining it. Different methods, different rickhouse methods, different barrels, things like that, because this was prior to the rules of bourbon. So Pappy said, no, we're not going to change anything. We make a fine bourbon at a profit if we can, at a loss if we must, but always a fine bourbon. So we didn't change anything. We let Mother Nature, Father Time, and let it go. All of these brick, if you look behind you, all those brick buildings, those are original to the 1933 to 1935 build. That brick is way too large. It's actually out of code. We don't use that brick anymore. But that's how you can tell some of those older buildings. These rick houses, we have 18 of them on property. Those were being built from 1934 all the way to the 50s. That's when we finally had all 18 completed. So 1935 Derby Day is when we officially open as Stitzel-Weller One Company. But why did we leave downtown? We were on Main Street. We were doing just fine in the hustle and bustle. Two of the reasons, taxes and water. Let's start with water. So the limestone shelf here in Kentucky, it makes for some great racehorses and some great whiskey. Taxes. So 13 years where they got a little bit from that medicinal product, but not a lot. The whiskey tax, that pays for all of our wars. Whiskey rebellion, yeah, that was when we were like, no, we should be able to get our own taxes off of our alcohol. And that's what paid for our ability, even today, to go to war. Wouldn't it be cool if another product could follow suit and become legalized, and maybe our taxes could go towards education? What a concept, yes. 4 to 6% of a barrel will evaporate every single year. So if you have a 10-year bourbon, you could have 3/4, half of a barrel, depending on how long it's been aged. Here in Pappy Van Winkle, they own the majority of the shares of this property from 1965 to 1972. Because in that time period, or leading up even to that time period, with the decline of Pappy's health comes the decline of bourbon. People stop drinking it. They start asking for those cocktails shaken, not stirred. They want the clear spirits, right? The flavored spirits. And so they move over into drinking vodka. Yeah. In 1972, vodka becomes the #1 spirit for Americans, and it lasts from 72 to 2015. Until 2015, so I always tell people, I'm like, you're welcome. Our generation brought bourbon back. It's fine. With that, though, even though Americans weren't drinking it, the Japanese were. Yeah. So in 72, they sell the property. United Distillers moves in, and they are making those 4 brands still. Because when you sell the property, everything stays. It's just the owner. So you assume everything, and you just start paying the bills as well as reaping the benefits.
Okay.
We are going to head into our fill house, and we are going to do our first pour. This is going to be our IW HARPER Cabernet Cask. Yes, it just came out February 1st, and it is probably my favorite for sipping neat. It's like that red wine finish, almost like the room temperature is just how it's supposed to be. So this IW HARPER on the nose, you're gonna get dark fruit. It's gonna be like plum, Luxardo cherry, like the original dark cherries. And then on the palate, it's gonna dry out. It's gonna be astringent. It's gonna be like a dry red wine. It'd be a little tanniny. Cheers.
How old is?
So it's a non-age statement bourbon, but then it's finished for 6 months in the California cab. So my guess is the bourbon would be like a minimum of anywhere from 3 to 6 years. Who knows? It's a non-age statement. But then we do 6 months in the California cab. Here's the receiving system. So once that product was coming out of that 65-foot column still, so that white lightning, They would then move it into these receiving cisterns, and they would hold them here until they had barrels or were ready to actually fill them. So you could hold 2 whole cisterns full of that white lightning before you actually needed to barrel. So move in this direction, moves into the fill house. Right here is an old pump, so you can see how it was pushing that product up and around. There's another pump in here as well.
Are you still using this?
No.
No.
We haven't used this since '94. So the United Distillers, they actually moved to the New Bernheim Distillery, and they sold the 4 brands. So Old Fitzgerald, Cabin Still, they went over to Heaven Hill. Rebel Yell, now just known as Rebel, went over to Lux Row. And W.L. Weller went over to Buffalo Trace. So that is where those brands are homed at today. But with that being said, they do not get to take the barrels, and they do not get to take the yeast. So the aging product, it stays. The yeast, it stays. You don't get to take that with you. We just kind of keep getting bought and sold and bought and sold. It essentially becomes a huge aging facility. We have those big 18 warehouses, so we used them, right? And even though Americans weren't drinking it, like I said, the Japanese were. So it still had to be made here, bottled here, sourced here to be bourbon, but they weren't wasting money on the American market. Are owned by Diageo. We're going to move into the tax house, and I will talk to you about that random 90s, 2000s period where everything kind of gets a little crazy. Real quick, I had a guy on my tour who his uncle worked here, and he told me that his uncle's job was to stand right here. And I was like, what did he do? And he was like, so those barrels, when they would roll down after they were filled, he would roll them onto those little tracks right there, and the rails would keep that momentum rolling. I was like, oh, I bet his back is destroyed. Like, these barrels are 550 pounds. And he said, he didn't use his back. He didn't bend over and turn them and roll them. He said he would stand right here. He'd kick the left side, would spin the barrel, and then he would kick it again, and it would roll, and the momentum of the bourbon in the barrel would keep it rolling all the way until it needed to change directions again.
They have the same statement.
So that's the one that was actually out on our wall out there. There's a picture of Pappy next to it with his cane. The IW Harper 15 year. So it is that non-age statement, IW Harper, but then it is going to be finished, I'm started talking about the wine cask again, but it is going to be aged for 15 years. So on the nose, you might get like a creme brulee, like a burnt sugar, some caramel. Yeah, We as Diageo own Tencray, Smirnoff, Crown Royal, Johnny Walker, Guinness, Bailey's. I mean, they got a broad spectrum. Don Julio, yes.
We went to the distillery and they don't have tours because they are just for mass production.
Just mass production.
So like,
that's our barrels end up Don Julio barrels. Yeah, when we're in the Rick House, I'll talk about that.
can we try it?
Wouldn't that be nice? There is Don Julio up at the bar. Yeah. All right. So with that being said, Diageo comes in, and those barrels, again, when you sell a product or sell a brand name, you're selling the name, right? So the yeast, that stays, and the barrels that are aging, they stay aging at that property. They are no longer yours. So when Diageo came in, they found a product, multiple barrels, that was left here aging for 22 years with the original wheated profile. Prior to Diageo, people were selling those barrels for pennies on the dollar, just trying to make some money on this location, right? So when Diageo came in, they're like, right? And they turned that into our Blade and Bow 22. There's a little bit of the 22 in every single bottle using the Solera method. So when we get into our Blade and Bow tasting, I'm like, where did my Blade and Bow go? When we get into our Blade and Bow tasting, I'll explain that a little more. However, I do want to talk about this bottle. So these keys, the blade of the skeleton keys portion goes in, Bow's portion you hold, but every single bottle comes with this little key, and it has that 5-key emblem on the front with those 5 keys on each side of the bottle. And that is because this is our homage to Pappy and his 5 keys. There's a little bit of that original 22 in here. And that is more Pappy than Pappy. Because when they took that Weller name, they took the name. You take the name and the mash
Those
bill.
22s that they found were Weller.
Right. Yeah.
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 So this is
They-
a wheated bourbon.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
weeded.
Oh.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's weeded. Yeah. So this will be our last tasting. So when we get to that, I'll explain a little bit more about how that whole method works. Bullet in 2002, Tom Bullet was set up here, and we put a huge bottling line in the back. So when we come out of here, you can see all those semis lined up, and right over the semis, that is that huge bottling line. So in the 2000s, they built that. 2014 is when we opened up and became the Bullet Experience. 2015 is when they announced Blade and Bow, but we didn't actually get to start focusing on Blade and Bow until 2020, when the Bullet Experience moved over to Shelbyville. Yeah. However, we still age Bullet products here, and we bottle all of Bullet's products here. Yeah, because Diageo built them a huge bottling line, and we're only 25 minutes away. So they're not gonna pay to put a brand new state-of-the-art bottling line in again when they can just truck the product over here. So we'll go around still House A in the old boiler room, and then we will move into the micro distillery where we have today's production. Sound good? All right. If you notice on the trees, our trees look very black on the trunk. You have that fence over here. You can even see it right here on these rocks. That is a fungus. It is known as the tattletale fungus. It eats alcohol vapor. So with that 4 to 6% that evaporates out of our 360,000 barrels every single year, this fungus is thriving.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is living its best life here. Smokestack is, this is Old Fitzgerald, that's what the smokestack was for. Yeah, it was the coal. And then it would produce steam, and steam would heat up the mash and the distillation. In 72, when United Distillers came in, it was Stitzel-Weller, but Old Fitzgerald was their #1 selling product because they had Old Fitzgerald, Cabin Still, Rebel Yell, and W.O. Weller all the way up until 94. And so in the 70s, people were moving away from family name and started moving towards brand name. And so that was their most recognizable brand name, and so that's what they ended up painting the stack. Going to show you my Barbie bourbon dream house. Bourbon must be made in America. I thought it was Kentucky. I was wrong. Just gotta be America. However, over 96% of bourbon comes out of Kentucky. And that is because of the limestone shelf, that water. The only other place in the world that has the same amount of limestone concentration as we do here in the Midwest is Germany. And they're known for great beer and great wine. Yeah, so that water is very important to the spirit. And that limestone shelf is in Southern Indiana and Tennessee, the other locations where people make bourbon. B, it must be a virgin white oak barrel. Nothing can be stored in that barrel before the white lightning goes in there, or it does not have the integrity to become bourbon. It is just whiskey. Then C, the majority grain must be corn. So corn is going to be 51% or more of our mash bill, but we also still use wheat, rye, and barley. Our master distiller, Jordan, we do a full day of training with him on mash and a full day of training with him on distillation. There, I want to say, I thought he was just in there. I know I saw him. So this mash, he literally has us zeroing out a scale. He says, all right, Kels, 7 pounds of malted barley, go. So I'm scooping it into the bucket, taking the bucket, marching up the steps, dumping it into that mash cooker. Actually cooking like you don't want food on the edges, so you scrape it all down so it doesn't burn. We spray it with water all around the edges so that it gets all the grain down. And then this cooks like an oatmeal. We use steam, heats up, makes that mash, and then moves over into one of our 6 fermentation tanks. So other distilleries have like the large open vats, same concept, just on a smaller scale. Research and development for the future of Blade & Bow, while still making at least a barrel of Blade & Bow a week, if not more. So we need to be able to switch up products pretty consistently. So having the smaller fermentation tanks instead of those big, large vats, it just gives us time to be able to switch up. After you add the yeast and the enzymes, you let it sit for about 4 days. When it's done, that's when it's called distiller's beer. That's why that beer well is called the beer well. Moves directly into our hybrid pot still. So Vendom made the original 65-foot still. They also made our new hybrid still. The only difference is that there's a pot on the bottom. The size is going to be a little different, but the inside of the column looks exactly the same if it were to be just a continuous column still. However, if you were to switch products with that big column still, you would have to shut down for over a day to be able to clean that still properly so that the yeast wouldn't mingle with the next product. There are 3 distillates that come off of every distillation. They're going to be your heads, your hearts, and your tails. So the coolest portion, that top 1/3, it'll evaporate, go up through the condenser, turn back to liquid, flow through the tails pipe, and into the heads portion of the 3-part separator. There's literal sheet metal in here so that they can't mingle. Then the middle portion, that's the hearts. That's going to be your good stuff, all right? That's the white lightning, moonshine, whiskey. It's that clear, drinkable distillate that comes off of here. That's the middle third. That goes up, evaporates through the column, turns back to liquid in the condenser, flows through the tails pipe, out to the tails box, and then into the middle of the 3-part separator. That last distillate, so the hottest portion, that last third, that's known as the tails. So that heats up, follows through the process, and moves into the tails portion of the 3-part separator. Then we sell off all of our byproduct. Mash, sold off the cattle feed. The heads, that's acetone. We sell that off for nail polish remover. Yeah. Middle is those hearts, so we pull those out, move them into the whiskey holding tank. And then the tails get sold off to a chemical company where they separate out the ethanol, the methanol, and the other alcohols. Then we take this whiskey and we proof it. We make sure that it is 125 proof or less. Because if it goes into the barrel at 131 proof, it's not bourbon, it's just whiskey. So it has to be that 125 or less, and then you can barrel it. So you just add water. Water is the only thing that can be added to bourbon to still have that integrity of bourbon. Once one of the fermentation tanks is ready, he'll turn that pump on, and it will push the product around the room and into our hybrid still. Now we'll do that. We'll start with this side. Down to the condenser, turn back to the liquid.
Una tercera parte, la tercera parte de arriba.
barrel the product. So that barrel says lot number 22 Foxtrot 29. This one says lot number 22 Foxtrot 22. That is the year, the month, and the day. So this one was June 22nd of 2022, and that one is June 29th of 2022 for aging, right? So you then take one from the top, one from the middle, one from the bottom, and it saves you a whole bunch of time. If the proof is still too high, we add water. Water is the only thing that can be added still.
Do you make a single barrel or something?
It depends. So single barrels, those are going to be like barrels that are far off from the profile you're looking for. Say they just didn't age the same, or even say maybe they're a better barrel than some of the other ones. They'll pull those barrels aside. And then like the bullet single barrel, we have our own select single barrel. So that's the one that our Stitzel-Weller master distiller picked out, a bullet single barrel. My local liquor store right across the bridge in New Albany, my little like neighborhood liquor store, that one is gonna have a completely different select single barrel. It's gonna be their single barrel. So literally they taste multiple and then they choose, okay, I need this one bottled for my company. So that's how the whole single barrel type situation works. With that being said, there is a ton of different products in here. We cut each individual stave by hand, which meant that they wouldn't line up so nicely. So when they would leak like this, they would leak profusely. And you would have to repair the barrel or face losing all of that barrel's product. So they would repair anywhere from 10 to 12 a day at a cooper shop on property. And we have the last cooper shop on the Bourbon Trail that you are able to walk into. So I'm going to take y'all in there in a second and I'm going to physically show you how they used to repair those barrels. Before we do that, how many of you would love to have a barrel on your front porch? Hi, empty, full, beggars can't be choosers, all right? The reason that they're so expensive is because bourbon starts in Kentucky, right? That white oak, barrels start in Kentucky because they start with bourbon. So that white oak starts by aging the bourbon here. It has to be that virgin white oak. But then we take the staves apart and we ship them to Scotland where they age Johnny Walker. When they're done aging Johnny Walker, they ship them over to Mexico where they age Don Julio tequila. Tequila's super rough on the barrels, just like it's rough on us humans. So if it makes it past Mexico, it will end in the Caribbean, where it will be Captain Morgan spiced rum. Yeah. So they have about 100 years worth of work to do in aging other products. So that is why it is so expensive to buy a barrel from Kentucky, is because they're worth tens of thousands in other products. So, who's heard of the Orphan Barrel line? Yeah. So Diageo, when they, in the 90s, 2000s era, were buying up a bunch of distilleries, the rule about selling a distillery is you could take the brand name, but those barrels stay with the location. So when they bought up multiple distilleries around the world, instead of selling them off like normal people would do, when people bought this location, they sold a bunch of barrels off to be mingled with Crown. Yeah, so that's what they normally do is you come into a property, you take the barrels and you either dump them or sell them off to be blended. People will buy this stuff. We're interested in that. Yeah, we don't know the mash bill. We don't care, right? We know the age statement. That's cool enough. So they put out this orphan barrel line where the barrels have been orphaned or left by the previous owners and forgotten about. This one is our Muckety Muck. The reason it is called Muckety Muck is because this one was the Port Dundas Distillery in Scotland. They always have an animal on the front. The reason this one has a pig is because they had a blue ribbon pig on property named Muckety that would eat the mash. the spent grain. Yeah. And so this is a 24-year Scotch. If there are 2 pigs on the front, it's a 25-year Scotch. And then these tartans are different colors. You'll be able to find, I think, like 5 or 6 different colors. And those are all based on the different Scottish families that had an impact on the distillery. So really, really cool. Again, if you are not a huge Scotch fan, I'm not offended. It's very low in peat.
Is this better than Blue Label or what?
It just depends on what you like. This one smells way more like a bourbon than like the Johnny Walker. The finish is more like a bourbon too. Yeah. And that's because the grain is only what's associated with the location. So like Japanese whiskey, so they bring about 10 to 12 leaky barrels in here a day. First things first, they would have to weigh it. Big old doctor scale. Put that big barrel up here, add a few weights to figure out what balances out, figure out the weight. And they did that so that the coopers, when they were repairing this, they weren't getting their own little sneaky cups in of bourbon. There's a little political cartoon right there about that. Obviously, there's always a little bit of truth to every political cartoon. But if you put new whiskey into a used barrel, it's not bourbon, right? So that's why that's just a little joke. But 550 pounds is how much these weigh when they're full. So anywhere from 2 to 550 is what these are gonna weigh. They'd have to put 2x4s down. And guys would have to roll the barrel up. They'd pop that bung out, completely empty it into this cistern down here, and then bring the barrel down. They would take all the rings off except for 2. They would pull this second ring up, second to last ring. They would find that leaky stave, and they would slide that reed all the way down, and then close the ring. This would seal that area in between the stave, acting as like a gasket. And as soon as the bourbon touches those reeds, it expands just enough. But reeds are natural and neutral. They're gonna provide no coloring and no flavoring. So the integrity of the bourbon stays. Now, unlike red wine, dumping that bourbon into here, the oxygen does not change the profile or the flavoring. It does pause the aging process. So from the time it leaves the barrel until the time it goes back into the barrel, it's not aging. Again, it only took like an hour, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Once they were done, they would roll the barrel right over here, fill it right back up with that same bourbon, weigh it again, make sure those sneaky coopers aren't getting their own cups, and then they'd put them right on the front porch. And they would do, again, about 10 to 12 a day. Originally, this cooper shop was on the other side of that rick house over here. We moved it over here for tour purposes. I had a guy on my tour last week that came in here and he told me that was his bench, which I thought was really, really cool. And then on the palate, it's gonna give you like dried apricot. When I think of dried apricot, I low-key think of face wash. So if you wanna think of something else, you absolutely can. But dried fruit.
No, I can think of face wash.
I know, I'm
My
sorry.
face wash goes, I'm like, yep, that's it.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And then the finish is gonna morph into like baking spices. Yeah. Cheers.
Salud.
So the way that they get that 22 year into every bottle of Blade and Bow is called the Solera method. Normally it's used for brandies, sherries, things like that. But it's where a bourbon sommelier takes a 6-year bourbon and mingles it with an older bourbon. And they let it sit and they let it age. And then they do it again. They mingle it with another older bourbon. They let it sit, they let it age. And they do that 6 times until the youngest is 11 years and the oldest is 22. Yeah. So there's a little bit of 22 in every single bottle using that method.
What about the 22 that you have for
The full bottle, that is a full bottle of just the 22. Yeah,
Are
but
those just for exhibition?
sadly, so just 3 weeks ago, we were told we're not allowed to sell the 22 anymore.
So you were selling it.
We were selling one a day for $900, and we sold it every day.
Oh wow.
$900.
Yes, it was about $960 something after tax.
Ooh.
Yeah, that $900. It is more Pappy than Pappy because it's the original yeast and it's the original weeded profile. We don't know what the original intentions were for it because it's essentially just like the other orphan barrels. It was left here, but we have an age statement on it and we know what they were making here at that time. So, yeah.
Is it still available by the pour?
Yes. Upstairs, we have a 22 tasting experience at the Garden and Gun Club bar.
Very cool.
Yes. So
What is the
I
price
think
on
it's 200, and you get like a full pour, not like these. You get a full pour, you get a little Glencairn and like a little like tasting sheets, the whole like experience.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess to be fair, assuming, knowing how things are in the bourbon world now, I'm assuming that $900 bottle sold out like 5 minutes every day.
Oh, yeah.
After you open.
Yep.
There's somebody camped out there in our
Yeah,
Over
no,
there.
but really, I would come at like 8:30 in the morning and unlock the gate, and when we were still selling the 22, there would be people already here like fighting about who got here first.
Yeah.
Upstairs, that Garden and Gun Club, Garden and Gun is actually a magazine. It is a Southern living and hospitality vacation magazine, and they did that bar upstairs. They completely flipped it during the pandemic. The only other Garden and Gun, the Atlanta Braves Stadium.
Ooh.
Yes. So even though if you don't want food or
When it's
drinks,
going, yeah.
I would say I still suggest going up there.
I'm from Atlanta.
Yes,
We're going to game tomorrow.
I'm from Atlanta too. You can go to ASW and hop over to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I live in Lexington. I'm from Atlanta, but I live in Lexington.
Amigos, we just finished with the tour. It's pretty cool. We learned a lot, especially about the Pappy Van Winkle. So you can see or you can buy all of the good things that those guys make here. So just buy it because yeah, it's maybe better than Pappy Van Winkle. And I have never tasted before whiskey 24 years old, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the 14 was pretty cool too. After the tour, when we finished, the very end, we tried one of the orphan barrels that was extra to the tour. It was $10 per the shot, so it was a 14 years old bourbon whiskey, so it was pretty good too. So Kelsey's a pretty good tour
She was
guide.
a pretty good tour guide.
Well, this is Mochilazo. My name is Luis.
And I'm Gabby.
Maybe I
If you
don't.
haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, share the video with people you think might find this information interesting.
And we will finish with the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So we stamp our passports here. So we are doing the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So see you in the next one.
Bye.
Viajeros, como siempre, muchas gracias por ver este video. Si no se han suscrito, suscríbanse al canal, den un like si les ha gustado y compartan con los viajeros a quienes pueda servir esta información.